It is now 20 years of Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, and what the hell does this game mean to me? Why the hell do so many people hold this game in such high regard? And it's an interesting topic to sort of go back and look at. Like, why do people talk so well about Third Strike? Why is it like the pinnacle of 2D animation and fighting games? How did it get to that? And what are my attachments to it? So, for perspective, I played Third Strike competitively from 2004, pretty much right after the Daigo parry. 2004, and I took it really seriously for about 5 years until Street Fighter 4 came out. So I was going to as many like Ranbat tournaments as I possibly could. I unfortunately was working full-time and going to school full-time at the time, but the local college I was going to, which I was playing Third Strike in a lot, had some pretty damn good competition because Southern California was a Third Strike mecca. It was one of the best places to be good at Street Fighter 3 outside of Japan and possibly Chinatown Fair, which was over on the East Coast. So it was pretty great. Like the competition was the best. We had some of the best players in the world down here that we got to go up against. Was I one of the best players in the world? Absolutely not. What I really wanted to do was to do awesome shit. I just wanted to do really cool stuff with these characters and do it in front of people. That was my big passion in arcades, was always to, oh my god, man, to always learn something really cool and practice the hell out of it. And then take your tech to the arcade, where you're going to have an audience, a live studio audience of people watching and surveying. Then people would start talking, who's this guy? Where's he from? Oh, this is the guy with that Ken. Like, I loved that aspect of the arcades, and we would speak of other people in the same way. I remember at one point, very early on, because Alex Valle was arguably one of the best Ryu players, if not one of the best Third Strike players that was in the US, and he was notably a rushdown monster, which, you know, got the respect of a lot of very casual people at the time, which was myself. So we didn't know what the hell these people looked like. Like, this was an FGC before I knew the faces of a lot of names, before I knew who, like, Gutex was, because he was a popular Urian player, before I knew what Pyro Lee looked like. I only knew them from watching so many things on combovideos.com to Original SRK and just watching old match footage that these names became ingrained in our head, and we had our friends that talked about all this stuff, and we just discussed it like, yeah, this is probably this guy playing this guy. Oh shit, I think he's over at Family Fun right now. We better go down there and play. That was a big aspect of my competitive life with Third Strike, of just going and finding the best people possible. We're like, whoa, this guy's playing down here. Let's go as soon as possible to go find the best competition. Because that was a big part of it. Competition for Street Fighter 3 back in the mid-2000s was limited to, good lord, pretty much the Xbox version of the game. And believe it or not, that's where I got a lot of my experience from. And believe it or not, one of the few players that had a good connection that I got a lot of my experience from went by another alias by the name of Cali Power. And yeah, that was Alex Valle. So a lot of these players that I sort of looked up to back in the day were I was unknowingly practicing with in an online environment because they use different handles. But yeah, Third Strike, when it came out, we all thought was going to be really cool, and man, the original Xbox version of Third Strike was rough, man. But if you did get local connections, it wasn't absolutely terrible, so I learned a lot of how to play the game, believe it or not, online on the original Xbox. And I think I've dropped maybe 4,000 matches into that thing. So, the interesting thing is that it wasn't about playing online, it was about learning stuff and learning matchups and then going to the arcade and proving it. So there's a lot of moments of me going to Family Fun on like a busy Saturday night and snapping a picture. I used to have like a live journal of me going to Super and FFA and sort of my competitive journey with these games. And believe it or not, oh man, I can probably look it up. I think there is a Capcom Community article, sort of like blog before there was many blogs, that I wrote about my competitive history with Third Strike and how moving and transitioning into Street Fighter 4, where Street Fighter was relevant all over again. And I wrote a small little thing. I'm sure some people can find it. I'm sure it's out there somewhere. But that's a little bit of it. And it was mostly about finding the best competition possible and playing the hell out of the game. I remember I had friends over that were Third Strike, like, diehard fans as well, and they stayed over for a week. And we literally took like a week of vacation to play Third Strike from work. And I think we practiced so much parrying, it was insane. We're just like, man, who can figure out how to reliably parry Dudley's EX machine gun blow like five times in a row? Let's see what the parry pattern is on Necro's electric snake super. Let's see what the parry pattern is on Necro's electric snake super, on his like electro super where he like is Blanca for a bit. How you can change the directions. We just did that stuff for like, no shit, a week to try to understand things. And it was a lot of fun. I don't think I've put any more individual time into any other fighting game except Third Strike. But it doesn't ignore the fact that at the highest level, it is frustrating. The game is incredibly imbalanced. Some of the core mechanics of the game do break down pretty hard. But what I learned was through post-online edition, post my competitive era with like playing Street Fighter 3 and going to as many tournaments as I possibly could and as many events, I learned that I love Third Strike, but this game is frustrating. But after Online Edition came out and it was sort of like a casual romp, I have to remember kind of how to play this game while these other fighting games have come out and I haven't played Third Strike in a few years. And I had a tough time being absorbed in this game so much, and then Ken came out in Street Fighter 4 and I made that transition. Took me a while to delete playing Ken in Third Strike because I had been doing it for so many years. And then, you know, picking up a brand new fighting game. But we can talk about my competitive history of Street Fighter 4. It didn't last very long. It was only about like a couple years. But that was a big part where a lot of the people that I grew up around playing when Street Fighter 4 came out was all those people that I was talking about. I was actually in Super Arcade, like racking up win streaks and going up against some of the best players in the world when that game was first in the US. And that wouldn't have happened unless I had a lot of experience from Third Strike. So, it's absolutely one of the most different Street Fighters of all of them because it is extremely footsie-based, but the thing I always liked about Third Strike was the fact that it allowed for more movement freedom because of parrying. If you knew somebody was going to uppercut you when you jumped in at them, if you got good enough at parrying all their anti-airs, you could stop that, and it looked awesome. Parrying an EX DP from Ken or another character when you're jumping in on them and then punishing the holy god out of them that they hit the ground is some of the coolest shit. It's some of my favorite stuff in fighting games still. So that was a big goal of mine, where it's like, you know what? I want to play this game my way. I know that Street Fighter is this heavily grounded footsie game, but this game's mechanics sort of allow you to open up in certain ways. And this is where I'm talking about that mid-level of Third Strike, where it's really fun because option selects and horrible balance and really weird mechanical decisions sort of break it at the highest level. But I truly believe at the mid-level of Third Strike, and this is, like I said, what I realized after Online Edition came out, the mid-level of Third Strike, when you understand the mechanics, you're able to utilize the mechanics and play a few characters and know a few matchups, and you're not at the highest level, you're not at EVO top 8 level, but when you're playing it with that understanding, it is absolute art. It is the best fighting game of all time, in my personal opinion. And it's an interesting thing to sort of break fighting games down to a beginner level of just understanding things, to a somewhat intermediate level of knowing how the mechanics work and how characters play and matchups and being okay at the game, and then a master's level, which you know everything, and it's about, you know, what do you do once you have everything at your disposal? Holy shit, man. Third Strike is, in my opinion, not only one of the most mechanically fun fighting games as far as a 1v1 fighting game, is still my favorite Street Fighter game to this date, and my favorite fighting game of all time, at a mid-level. And that's kind of like a caveat. People are going to be like, oh, but it's really specific. It is, but that's the thing with fighting games, and especially fighting games made in the 90s. They were all horribly busted. Everything at the highest level was incredibly jank and incredibly broken. And some were better than others, absolutely, but that understanding sort of like opens up the possibility of seeing what you love about the game a bit more. And the funny thing is that it's not just the gameplay of Third Strike that'll keep you going. You come back and you look at this game and you realize it's probably the pinnacle of 2D art in fighting games. And that's saying a lot, like, outside of the stuff that SNK has done with, like, Metal Slug and a wide variety of amazing-looking 2D fighting games. Third Strike, in terms of the stuff you don't think about, the terms of hit stun, the term of impact, the term of, like, how does this game feel? Like, how does it feel to punch somebody in a fighting game? Does that responsive? How does that, as the player, is there enough time to react to things? How reactive are you to your character on screen? And you really get to see why Third Strike is so good when you go back and you play Street Fighter 3 New Generation or Street Fighter 3 Second Impact or Double Impact, which has both games. They're kind of clunky, and you understand what makes Third Strike so good. They really were fine-tuning. It was like they had this mold of this engine that they were figuring out, and they were just sculpting and sculpting and sculpting until they get to Third Strike, and they come up with something really good. Between the animation, the character movement, like I said, the way special moves feel, the way parrying feels, the sound effects, like the presentation of the game, like the crazy, like super urban attitude the entire game has. It has so much friggin' personality. And I don't think it's been emulated very well since. Other games have tried, but not well. And I think Third Strike still stands kind of the test in time. Yeah, Galro Mark of the Wolves is a great example. Galro was SNK's answer to Street Fighter 3. And it inspired a lot, and that means a lot. And it's an interesting story because Third Strike was a commercial huge failure. Like, the game bombed. And it's another similar story to another Capcom game that is wildly considered to be one of the greatest games of all time, which is Resident Evil Remake. And if you go back and you look at the sales and what happened when RE Remake came out, it was a disaster. Like, the game did not sell what they expected it to sell. But now it's considered to be one of the greatest games of all time. Like, one of the greatest survival horror games ever made is Resident Evil Remake. And now it's been re-released a variety of times and people love the shit out of it. So it's weird. Like, they have these few games that are like these diamonds in the rough that when they come out, they're weird and they have characters that people don't recognize and no one's really playing it. But over time, and due to a couple of very important events like the Daigo parry, which was probably the biggest viral thing that's ever happened to fighting games, is pretty cool. Is really cool. That thing, that the Daigo parry was so viral that it transcended just like video game news. I remember some other people I was talking to that weren't into fighting games, and I would say that, yeah, I play Street Fighter, and they're like, oh, were you at that one crazy event where the guy had that full sequence and everyone went insane? I was told by other people that had seen that had never known anything about like a community of fighting game folks or the fact that fighting games existed beyond Street Fighter 2. It was crazy, and that moment was very fueled by exactly what is amazing about the fighting game community. Exactly what's amazing about the relationships that fighting games bring you to is those insane ass moments and how amazing it feels. Much less to have you be in a situation where you're able to pull off something like that. So, yeah, Third Strike is kind of a big reason why I even got into hardcore competitive fighting games. And it's not the first one I did play. I'm not even kidding you. We had a local, like, it wasn't a Ranbat, but it was a Ranbat where we kept score of who was winning a tournament every single week, and then people would come back and you'd take names and there'd be like a score ranking, and at the end of like a month, you'd have like the champion. And this is when I was, good God, I was maybe 12 or 13 years old, but we would have Killer Instinct Ranbats in our community that would about 15 to 30 people would show up to where I grew up. And when Killer Instinct came out on Super Nintendo, that was my original fighting game tournament roots, was that I won about 4 months of these tournaments, and then everyone around me kept practicing and getting better and better and better. And then eventually they started beating me. And then it became really cool, this back and forth of who can possibly like outmatch the next person and who had a better character to figure things out. That stuff was amazing, man. And that was my first introduction to like a community of like OG Killer Instinct on Super Nintendo. And then beyond that, it carried over to me wanting to get really good at Marvel vs. Capcom. I have to learn how to use an arcade stick. I love the Versus series and, you know, everything like that. I went to a few tournaments for Tekken 3 back in 1998. But it's tough when you don't have a vehicle and you live 60 miles away from malls and arcades. And I did what I could. Like, I wanted to spend as much time as I could getting good at this stuff. And it was always really nice to be around a lot of people that were much older, like in their 20s, sometimes in their 30s. And I was this preteen, man. I was like 12 years old in some of these tournaments. And it was really cool being impressed by a lot of these people. And they would ask you questions about stuff. And yeah, that was those games are what shaped me into this, but I never took any of them as seriously as I did with Third Strike, and the Daigo parry was a big moment that sort of sparked that fire. That made me really want to get good, and I spent a lot of time. And the coolest part was that I started dating Jessica right in the midpoint of that, like around 2005, and she was super interested in it as well. She thought Third Strike was a really cool game. She was probably being super sweet and expressing interest in the things that I was interested in. But there was many times where I would go to tournaments and she would be supporting me, like right on the side of the tournament, or at like Ranbats and stuff at Family Fun Arcade. And yeah, there's a lot of memories of that stuff, man. There's a lot of memories of that. So it's crazy how far we've come, and the craziest part is that the things I loved the most about Third Strike and competing in fighting games was to hone your skills and then go to an arcade setting to perform in front of a whole bunch of people and surprise everybody. That one of my favorite things ever. And no kidding, was one of the reasons I started making YouTube videos, was one of the reasons I started like trying to get people interested in these games, because that feeling is amazing. And is insane because now that's what all this is. Like, Twitch is absolutely the epitome of like, oh, let's go online and have some fun and see what crazy stuff we can do. Which is why I'm not a great competitor, and I usually go for the stupid hype stuff instead of a cemented victory. And that is a long-running weakness I have always had in competition ever since the very beginning. If there's a chance that Chun-Li and myself are within chip damage range, or Chun-Li is in chip damage range and I have enough health to support it, but if Chun-Li throws out SA2, I think it is, and does the kick super, am I going to be pressing forward to try to parry the full super, or am I just going to throw her and punish after? It's a pretty good chance I'm going to make I'm going to take the stupid option in that situation and go for the dumb shit. And I always did, and it bit me in the ass sometimes, and then sometimes it didn't, and sometimes it was some of the most fun that was out there. So no, dog, I'm holding forward. I'm holding forward. So that's Third Strike for me. That's why I find it to be really important. Not only was it a game that is still ridiculously fun to this day, that you can play with people, the game is still visually impressive. You still look at it, and when people see you parry stuff, when people see you out-footsie somebody, and then suddenly you get a low parry, hit confirm into super, it is like, holy shit, how did they know how to do that? And the answer is years of experience. The answer is a lot of time.